4 straight Super Bowls. But it almost didn't happen. There is one massive trade that football fans don't even think of, especially Bills fans. If this trade didn't happen, then the historic Buffalo Bills run of the early 1990s might not have happened. Who is the catalyst, you might ask? Well, his name is Tom Cousineau. December 26th, 1965. The Bills just won their second straight AFL championship under coach Lou Saban, and they were led onto the field by their quarterback and team leader, Jack Kemp, who was also named the AFL MVP in 1965. A 23-0 shutout of the San Diego Chargers just cemented the franchise's place in AFL and NFL history. Going into the 1966 season, most of the team returned, and they were looking for another deep run. The Bills' 9-4-1 record was good enough to get them into their third straight AFL championship game against Lamar Hunt's Kansas City Chiefs. The winner of this game will go on to Super Bowl I to face the NFL champion Green Bay Packers in the first ever AFL-NFL championship game. Wasn't called the Super Bowl quite yet. Unfortunately, the Bills lost to the Chiefs 31-7. It would be the Bills' last playoff game till 1974, and it would be the beginning of a new, dark, and miserable era in Bills football. The Bills went 4-10 in 1967 and went 1-12-1 in 1968. Between Coach Lou Saban's departure and a lot of the talent from the back-to-back AFL championship teams also leaving, the Bills became slowly dismantled. Jack Kemp injured his knee in a scrimmage against Houston in the preseason in 1968, and it caused him to miss the whole year. To make things worse, on January 17, 1969, Ralph Wilson hired John Raunch to be the new head coach. After 3 straight winning seasons in Oakland, he seemed like a good hire. On January 28th, the Bills selected O.J. Simpson with the number 1 overall pick in the 1969 NFL Draft. The new era had begun. Even Jack Kemp was back and healthy. But unfortunately, optimism and reality don't always mix. The Bills finished 4-10 in 1969, and in 1970 they finished 3-10-1. Coach Rauch quit on July 20th, 1971. Him and Ralph Wilson had a fight over some comments made about 2 players on the team. Personnel director Harvey Johnson took over as head coach after this. Unfortunately, all that turmoil led to a disastrous 1-13 season in 1971. But there was some hope heading into 1972. The Bills would bring back a familiar face, Coach Lou Saban, who helped lead them to 3 straight AFL championship games. Hopefully, Coach Saban could inject some life into the team, and hopefully start to turn on the juice. Lou Saban is back, and O.J. Simpson could not be happier. From 1969 to 1971, O.J. had 484 total carries in those 3 seasons. He averaged about 161 carries a year during that stretch. Pretty modest in average. But under Coach Saban, from 1972 to 1976, O.J. had a total of 1,530 carries, which turned out to be about an average of 306 carries a year, almost doubling his carries. What running back couldn't love that? In 1972, the Bills went 4-9-1. It was Saban's first year building his team. But everything started to slowly come together in 1973. The Bills got their new stadium. State-of-the-art Rich Stadium was a monument for the whole league to see. They finished 9-5 on the year and had their first winning record since 1966. And oh wait, didn't something huge happen in 1973? Yes, the Juice and the Electric Company went on to break the record for 2,000 rushing yards in a season, the first time in NFL history. And OJ did it in 14 games. To make things even sweeter, he also won the 1973 MVP. How would OJ and the Electric Company follow up 2,000 yards? Well, OJ did not hit 2,000 yards again in 1974. But he and the Bills did reach another milestone. More specifically, big milestone for OJ. His first career playoff game. The Bills traveled to play the eventual Super Bowl champion Pittsburgh Steelers. Fortunately, the Steelers won 32-14 that day. And it wasn't even close. Simpson caught a 3-yard touchdown pass from Joe Ferguson late. But it wasn't enough. OJ was shut down all day by the Steel Curtain, having 15 carries for only 49 yards. He also chipped in 3 catches for 32 yards, and that receiving touchdown. But, sadly, this would be OJ's only playoff game for the Bills, and it would be the Bills' last playoff game until the 1980 season. OJ would have a spectacular 1975. He won his 3rd rushing title with 1,817 yards on the year. He also chipped in 23 touchdowns. Wait, 23. The record at the time was 22, held by the legendary Bears back Gale Sayers. So OJ would break his record, a record that he would hold for quite some time. Most touchdowns in a season. The 1,817 yards was OJ's second most rushing yards in a season, and he would hold that for the rest of his career. In 1976, OJ would have another good year, 1,503 rushing yards and 8 touchdowns. Unfortunately, under new coach Jim Ringo, the team would finish 2-12 and miss the playoffs, and tensions would start to rise. Tensions were rising, and the end was starting to come near. OJ started the 1977 season frustrated. I quote, "We look like we're gearing up for another rebuild." End quote. Seemed like something OJ didn't want. He talked about losing players and being upset with management about it. But that fell on deaf ears. It was unfortunately just the beginning of the end. OJ had a real good start to the 1977 season. Through the first 7 games, he had 557 rushing yards, well on pace for another 1,500-yard rushing season. In spite of the team going 1-6, on October 30th, the Bills would travel to Seattle, and they wouldn't just lose the game 56-17. They would also lose their franchise player for the rest of the year. OJ needed surgery on his left knee. His season over. After the Seattle game, Reggie McKenzie, one of OJ's favorite teammates, probably his best friend on the team, saw OJ walking around the locker room, asking his teammates for jerseys. McKenzie would say, and I quote, "That's when I knew it was over for OJ in Buffalo." On March 2nd, 1978, O.J. Simpson was traded to the San Francisco 49ers for a second and a third round pick in 1978 and a first and a fourth round pick in 1979 and a second round pick in 1980. Pretty good haul for a player coming off surgery on his left knee. New coach Chuck Knox said, "It gives the Buffalo Bills the opportunity, with some high draft choices, to get some young football players in the draft." The rebuild was indeed starting. OJ would go on to thank Buffalo. He would say, "I will always be a Buffalo Bill, and I'm proud of that." The Bills would finish 5-11 in Knox's first year as coach. The rebuild was truly underway. The 49ers, on the other hand, would finish the 1978 season with a 2-14 record. Good enough for last place in the NFL. But their 1979 first-round pick was not in their possession anymore. It was in the Bills' possession. It was the first-round pick that they grabbed in the trade for O.J. Simpson. The 49ers gave up 5 picks over the next 3 years for the Bills' top superstar. And on paper, it looked like it was going to backfire for the 49ers. O.J. finished 1978 with 593 yards on 161 carries, with 1 rushing touchdown. He also caught 21 passes for 172 yards and 2 touchdowns. But that production is nowhere near the amount of the capital that the 49ers gave up for him. Safe to say, the Bills won the trade. As for OJ, he was just never the same after his knee injury in 1977 in Detroit. He would only play 10 games in 1978 and 13 in 1979. He seemed to be a shell of himself, sadly. In 1979, OJ would only have 460 rushing yards off 120 carries and 3 rushing touchdowns. He would add 7 catches for 46 yards. On December 16th, 1979, he would play his final NFL game. It was OJ Day at Candlestick Park. He was honored by the 49ers. He gained 12 yards on 2 carries that day. But the major thing was that the greatest Bills running back ever, and maybe one of the greatest running backs in NFL history, had called it a career. May 3rd, 1979, the day of the NFL Draft. The Buffalo Bills would hold the number 1 overall pick. And they were looking to select the top-rated linebacker and defensive player in the nation. His name was Tom Cousineau. So, who is this Tom Cousineau guy? And why has everyone been raving about him? The great Woody Hayes recruited Tom Cousineau out of Lakewood High School in Ohio in 1975. Cousineau was one of the most sought-after recruits in the nation at the time. During his 4 seasons at Ohio State, the Buckeyes were one of the top teams in the nation. The Buckeyes completed a record of 36-10-2 during Tom's playing days there. Cousineau established himself as one of the top linebackers in the nation. He was named an All-American in 1977 and 1978, his junior and senior year. His 211 tackles in 1978 are still a school record, and his 569 career tackles are only second to linebacker Marcus Merrick, who would actually replace Cousineau at linebacker after he left. Those records still stand to this day. His 29 tackles in a game is still the record for any Ohio State player. It's tied with Chris Spielman, though. He did that against Penn State in 1978. Cousineau's last game of his Ohio State career was unfortunately Woody Hayes' last game as well. In the 1978 Gator Bowl, Ohio State would play Clemson. With 2 minutes left in the game, OSU quarterback Art Schlichter threw an interception to Clemson defensive tackle Charlie Bowman. Bowman was shoved out of bounds after the interception. But as Bowman got up, Coach Woody Hayes struck him with a punch to the side of the throat. Hayes was fired the next day. As one storied career would end, another one would begin, as Cousineau was preparing to be the top pick in the 1979 NFL Draft. So whose fault was it? Was it Bills owner Ralph Wilson, who had a reputation for being cheap? Was it Cousineau's agent Jim Walsh, who insisted that he was just trying to get the best offer he could for his client? Or was it Cousineau, who at the end of the day just decided he liked Montreal better than Buffalo? Whatever the reason, Tom would leave for the CFL and greener pastures after the contract negotiations broke down. On May 4th, Cousineau and Walsh visited One Bills Drive, looking to get a contract in the works. Walsh is quoted by saying, "We expect no problem whatsoever, because Tom says he doesn't want to have any problems signing." That's a good start, and it seemed to get better when number 5 overall pick Jerry Butler, wide receiver from Clemson, just signed his deal. May 20th was the start of minicamp, and Cousineau still had not signed. Head coach Chuck Knox said, "Not being here hurts him. If we didn't think it would benefit the players, we wouldn't have them here." Looks like coach is not happy. On June 29th, Cousineau visits with Montreal. Uh-oh. That can't be good. On July 8th, Jim Walsh told the Toronto newspaper that, "I think Tom would prefer to play in Montreal. I have no plans to talk to Buffalo, and there's nothing to talk about." End quote. Wow, that seems pretty bleak. Well, on July 19th, Cousineau signed with the Montreal Alouettes. It was a 3-year deal, worth between $850,000 and $1 million, depending on the signing bonus. Ralph Wilson had said to have offered $1.2 million for 5 or 6 seasons. It would have been the second highest rookie contract in NFL history. To put that in context, the average CFL player at the time was making between $30,000 and $36,000 a season, while the average NFL player was making about $63,000 a year. Cousineau would have been making a lot of money, so why would he decide to go play for the Grey Cup? The old saying is it's all about who you know, not what you know. And Cousineau's agent Jim Walsh, who was a lawyer by trade, had a friend. His friend was Montreal Alouettes owner Sam Berger, who had recently purchased the Alouettes and moved them to Olympic Stadium in Montreal. This helped raise attendance, of course. But Berger knew he needed another big draw to keep the fan base excited. So he ponied up the money to get Cousineau. Walsh would go on to buy 40% of the Alouettes a few years later. He claimed that it had nothing at all to do with Cousineau's signing. Yeah, okay. I know what collusion is. Walsh claimed to get the best deal he could, as he said before, for his client. And yeah, he did possibly get him the best deal. But by doing that, he royally screwed the Bills. And hey, that kind of seemed to be the plan all along. It lined Walsh's pockets, and he took care of all his friends. Plan well done, Jim Walsh. You fleeced the Bills. Sam Berger wanted to put together a competitive team, as every owner should strive to do for their franchise. Signing Cousineau was a huge coup. Berger was a lawyer by profession. That explains why him and Jim Walsh were such good adversaries. And friends. Whatever the reason, Cousineau was not in the NFL. He would experience immediate success. In 1979, the Alouettes would finish with an 11-4-1 record. They would win the East Division and ride that momentum all the way to the Grey Cup, where they would lose to Warren Moon and the Edmonton Eskimos. In 1980, Montreal would make it to the East Final, eventually losing to Hamilton. But in 1981, the Alouettes would go 3-13. That would probably make Cousineau's decision about his future an easy one. Tom's major at Ohio State was marketing, so he had a good idea how to play the market. No pun intended. Cousineau had a clause in his deal to forego the last 2 seasons of his deal with Montreal. So like that, his CFL career was over. So, Tom looked towards the NFL again. Cousineau said, "Personally, I believe in free agency. I would have been a bitter man locked into playing for Buffalo. Their first offer to me was definitely not fair." Really? 1.2 mil for 5 years? Not fair? They're both pretty similar deals to me. Sounds like sour grapes. How's it gonna go? Well, Cousineau would not want to return to the Bills. On April 19th, 1981, the Oilers made an offer to Cousineau. 5 years, $3.5 million with a $1 million signing bonus. The Bills could match it or let him go. It would also make him the highest paid player in the NFL at the time. But on April 24th, the Bills matched the offer, then turned around and traded him to Cleveland. Ralph Wilson said, "I was shocked by Houston's offer. It was way out of line." Obviously, at that point, Ralph just wanted to wipe his hands clean of Cousineau. The Bills received a great haul from the Browns. A first-round pick in the 1983 draft, and a second and third-round pick. So like that, Cousineau would be heading home to Ohio to play for the Browns. The Browns finished 4-5 in 1982. Wait, 4-5? Now why would they finish 4-5? Oh wait, the strike of 1982 cost the NFL half that season. But the Browns made up for it by still getting to play in the postseason. There was a 1-8 team tournament in each conference. Unfortunately, the Browns were the 8th seed, and they had to play their playoff game against the top-seeded Raiders. It was a 27-10 loss in LA. Cousineau had his first taste of playoff action. He finished 1982 as the AP Defensive Rookie of the Year at 25. The Browns finished 9-7 in the next year, in 1983, just missing the playoffs. Cousineau had a good year, 4 interceptions, 2 fumble recoveries, and 4 sacks. Tackles were not recorded at the time, but I'm sure he had a lot. Haha. He was also named second team All-NFL. He would repeat as second team All-NFL in 1984, but unfortunately the Browns wouldn't find as much success. They finished 5-11, and the roster seemed to be in a state of flux. In 1985, the Browns won the division at 8-8. Ooh. At the time, it was the worst division winner we've ever seen. But it was different then, considering there were only 6 divisions. Now there's 8. So to do it then, man, that's something special there. They lost in the first round of the playoffs that year to the Dolphins 24-21 in a tough game. It would also be Cousineau's last game as a Brown. Linebackers Chip Banks and Clay Matthews will go on to be regular All-Pro linebackers. This made Cousineau expendable. Because he had a huge contract, and it was his time to leave. Some would say he was a bust in Cleveland. Nah, I wouldn't say all that. Overpaid? Probably. But he still produced well, finishing his Browns career with 8 interceptions, 6.5 sacks, and 5 fumble recoveries. Cousineau's last stop would be San Francisco. That's kind of funny, because the man he was traded for, his last stop was San Francisco. It's funny how the wheel turns in the NFL sometimes. In his 2 seasons in San Fran were pretty uneventful. He was mostly a reserve player. But Cousineau got to go to the playoffs both years. Unfortunately, the 49ers suffered 2 first-round losses in both seasons. After the 1987 season, Cousineau quietly retired. He had a modest career and made some good money. Hey, looks like that marketing degree came in handy. Cousineau had an average career on the field, but it was his post-playing career that brought him more success. After football, he dabbled in real estate and highway construction. He helped fund and market a software called Orchestral. I'm not a medical guy. This keeps financial records for hospitals. He got married and had 2 daughters. His college accolades were also recognized. In 1995, he was inducted into the Ohio State Sports Hall of Fame. In 2016, Cousineau was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame, and he even got to work in football once again. In 2009, he was a linebacker coach at St. Vincent St. Mary's High School in Akron, Ohio. What became of that Browns first-round pick that was acquired in 1983? The Bills had their first-round pick. It was the 12th overall pick, and with that, they took tight end Tony Hunter out of Notre Dame. But with the 14th pick overall that they acquired from Cleveland, what would they want to grab? Would they look towards the future? Maybe draft a quarterback? That's exactly what they did. The team took Jim Kelly out of the University of Miami. On May 26th, the Bills would offer Kelly a 4-year contract for $2 million. Kelly's agent, Greg Lustig, said, "If that's it, we won't accept it. That's in the ballpark we expected from the Bills." Oh, no, wait a minute. Here we go again?